Hi everyone, welcome to Julie Reads Her Bookshelf. I'm Julie, and for those of you who are new to the channel, this is a channel where I read through all of the books on my bookshelf until we reach zero, and we are a long way from that. As we approach the end of the year, I wanted to do a video about my reading theme of the year. So some of you who have followed my channel for a while now might know that I have a reading theme for every year, and that's something I've been doing since 2021. And the idea of a reading theme is that rather than tying myself down to a list of books I want to read, which I'm not very good at, I pick a theme and I sort of dip in and out throughout the year, predominantly but not exclusively reading books based around a particular theme. And that helps me, on the one hand, challenge myself and fill in some of the gaps in my reading that I haven't explored yet. But at the same time, it doesn't tie me down to a particular plan for the whole year and leaves me with enough flexibility and enough room to try out new things as well throughout the year. So this is something that I've been doing since 2021. And in 2021, my reading theme of the year, which was kind of accidental, was Proust. So 2021 was a COVID year, and where I am in Australia, we were locked down for a long time. So I spent most of the year in lockdown reading Proust, an exercise that I was not the only person to undertake, for sure, but I also don't recommend because lockdowns are hard enough without adding Proust to the equation. But nonetheless, I read all 7 volumes of In Search of Lost Time in that year. And I also read a lot of other kind of juvenilia by Proust, as well as books about Proust. So that was my theme for 2021. In 2022, my theme of the year was Russian literature, and that's probably my best year of reading yet. I absolutely loved it. It did get a bit intense towards the end of that year, mostly because there's only so many times you can ask yourself, what is the meaning of life? And those Russian books definitely pose those kinds of big philosophical questions, and it does get quite heavy towards the end of the year. But that was a great year where I read all of the Russian classics that I had always wanted to read, like War and Peace, Crime and Punishment. I read a lot of Chekhov. So that was a great year of reading for me. In 2023, the reading theme was Victorian literature. And by that, I mean not the state of Victoria in Australia, but rather the reign of Queen Victoria in England and all of the literature that were produced during that period of absolute flourishing. And overall, I really enjoyed Victorian literature. I got to read Middlemarch, which I think is probably one of the best books I've ever read. I also read a bit of Anthony Trollope, who was so amusing. The one Victorian writer that I do struggle with is Charles Dickens, and I haven't quite given up on him yet. I'll return to him at some point in the future, but so far he's not managed to convince me. In 2024, my reading theme of the year was a year of reading French literature. And the reason for picking it is that I just happen to have a lot of unread books of by French authors on my bookshelf. And as I'm doing this project of reading through all of the unread books on my bookshelf, I want to kind of explore the themes that naturally emerge among the books there. So this was probably the most obvious one for me. And unfortunately, it's also been the least successful of all of the reading themes that I've had. So this year I read a total of 5 books based on my reading theme. The first one is The Charterhouse of Parma by Stendhal. Now, I had read Stendhal in the past. I read The Red and the Black, I think when I was a kid, which I do not recommend. It's definitely not a children's book. But bizarrely, The Charterhouse of Parma would have been a better pick for a younger reader because it is kind of bordering on an adventure book. It follows the main protagonist, Fabrizio, who kind of runs away to join Napoleon's army from Milan. And from there, he gets into all kinds of trouble. And and he also has kind of a weird relationship with his incredibly attractive aunt, who may or may not be in love with him. It's kind of a weird and chaotic and fun adventure, and I really, really liked this book. It's probably, I would say, one of my favorite French reads of the year. I followed up Stendhal with probably my least favorite book of the year, which is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. And I have only myself to blame for it because, on the one hand, I picked it And I picked it for March of the Mammoth, which is a booktube event devoted to reading very large books. And I also am the kind of person who never gives up on a book, even if I don't like it. So I ended up reading through all of this book, even though about halfway through I was so frustrated. The problem with Les Miserables isn't the story, it isn't the characters. Actually, the main arc of the story is quite well done. And I thought the characters themselves were really lively and realistic, with the exception of a few female characters. But that's to be expected from a 19th century male writer. What my problem with this book is that it is so bloated, and you could have edited about 500 pages off this book and it would work much, much better. And I just think that at the time that Victor Hugo wrote this book, he had such stature as a French writer in exile that maybe there was some reluctance to suggest that he depart from his vision of just writing an incredibly bloated magnum opus. But overall, I really thought this book could do with some hard editing, because the latter third of this book was just a complete slog to get through, and the kind of tangents and distractions that some people enjoy, I just absolutely did not get. I did not understand what half of the content that was in the book was actually doing there, because it served no narrative purpose and it only served to distract the reader from what the main storyline was and what the main point of the novel was. I kind of shocked myself by finishing this book, but honestly, I feel like this book had the effect of derailing half my reading year, because I was struggling, I was procrastinating, and I was just not enjoying it for the whole time I was reading this book. From the very long to the very short, I then followed up Les Miserables with Une si longue lettre by Mariam Abba, which is a tiny novella. I read it in original French, but the English language translation is called So Long a Letter by Mariam Abba, who is a Senegalese writer. And this is an epistolary novella about a Senegalese woman who experiences polygamy and is then widowed. So her husband dies and she starts writing a very long letter to her best friend, who has also experienced polygamy, but the two of them reacted very differently to that episode in their life. And the book is ultimately one about feminism, the role of women in Senegalese society, but it's also about this idea of betrayal, the tension between tradition, being Senegalese tradition, but also modernity, and that kind of push and pull and the oppression of women within that society. So it's a complex book, but it's wise and it's incredibly heartfelt, without kind of hitting you on the head with the point. So I really enjoyed this book. It's probably one of my best reads of the year. I haven't really talked about it much because I did read it in a different language, and I don't know how widely available. I suppose you could get it on Amazon, but I don't know how widely available the English language translation otherwise is. I've never read anything else by Mariam Abba, but one of the things that this book has opened my eyes to is this idea of, well, what is French literature? Is French literature literature of France, or is it the literature of Francophone countries, which vastly expands the notion of what French literature is and the kind of books that are available within that genre. So I highly recommend this book if you can get your hand on it. One of my reading goals for every year is that I would read at least one book in French and at least one book in Chinese. And unfortunately, I didn't quite get there this year. I read one book in French, but I didn't get around to reading my Chinese book. But we will remedy that next year. I do actually plan on reading a lot more Chinese literature in 2025. So hopefully that will be fixed. I could hardly let a year of reading French literature go by without reading any Alexandre Dumas, and the book I picked was The Black Tulip. This is a really old translation by, there's no translator listed, but the book is published by Heron Books. It's quite a dated translation. I know Penguin still publishes this book in their classic line, so hopefully that's a more modern translation than this one. I didn't mind the older translation at all. The book is about a tulip grower who is on a mission to grow the perfect black tulip. And there is intrigue, there is imprisonment, there is revenge, there is romance, there are all of the things that you expect from an Alexandre Dumas novel, and it's a lot of fun. You will finish it within a couple of days, as with all Alexandre Dumas novels. So I really enjoyed this one. It's not one that I'll remember for a long time. It's not particularly memorable, but it's a great one to kind of keep you engaged in your reading and keep the momentum up. The final book of French literature that I read and finished was Memoirs of a Dutiful Daughter by Simone de Beauvoir. I'm not much of a memoir reader. I find the idea of a self-biography quite indulgent. And so I had very little patience for the excruciating detail in this autobiography by Simone de Beauvoir. So Memoirs of a Dutiful Daughter is the first of, I think, 4 volumes of her autobiography. So for me, I really needed to quite enjoy it to commit to a 4-volume exercise, and I just didn't get there. Simone de Beauvoir starts off with kind of her childhood growing up in a middle-class French family and really kind of meeting all of the societal expectations for how she would be as a young woman, to eventually rebelling against those expectations and really coming into her own. The premise of that should be good, but it's the excruciating detail of what happened when she was 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, when all of her kind of mood swings as a teenager, that I just found kind of excruciating to get through. So I wasn't enthralled by this book. I thought it was okay. I got through it, but I didn't particularly enjoy it, and I certainly didn't enjoy it enough to commit to the rest of the 3 volumes of her autobiography. The final book that I read but didn't finish was the complete essays of Michel Montaigne. So I had read Michel Montaigne before in a selected volume, which I have somewhere up there. I really enjoyed that selected volume, so I got the complete set, and my intention for the year was to keep this by the side of my bed and just read a couple of essays a day and hopefully get through it. I didn't manage that. I fell out of that habit when I went traveling and came back and just never got back into reading Michel Montaigne regularly again. So, but what I did read, I enjoyed. Michel Montaigne has a really intimate and wise tone when he writes, and he writes about absolutely everything that pops into his head. So the experience of reading through these essays is kind of a really interesting wander through someone else's mind as he muses about friendship, about history, about Greek mythology, about basically anything and everything. Sometimes you agree with him, sometimes you think what he says is complete crap, but he's always amusing and he's always engaging. So I do have intentions to continue with this, and hopefully I can keep to the habit of reading a couple of essays a day, but this is staying by the side of my bed and I'm going to keep going with it. And that's my year of reading French literature. I finished a total of 5 books by French authors or Francophone authors, 4 of them in English and 1 in French. And I am continuing with my journey through the complete essays of Michel de Montaigne. It's not my most successful reading theme, but I think part of the goal of doing these kind of theme-based reading is that it gives me an opportunity to push beyond my reading comfort zone, and also to explore some of the gaps in my reading. And for that, it did accomplish its purpose. So it's not a total lost cause. As for my theme for 2025, I think 2025 will be the last year where I am guided by my unread books in terms of picking a theme, because as I progress through this project of reading through all of my unread books, the themes that naturally emerge from the books that are left on my bookshelf are less and less obvious. So in future years after 2025, I will probably just stick to whatever reading theme I want to read, and then use library books and a mixture of books that are already on my bookshelf and ebooks to supplement those themes. But for next year, I'm still guided by my unread bookshelf. So the reading theme for next year will be bricks. And that is not the actual object of a brick, but rather the acronym that stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So I will read books coming from non-Anglo-Saxon, non-Western countries predominantly, and I will be reading books that are predominantly in translation with the exception of South Africa and India. And I will be reading some writers which are hopefully new to me. So I'll discuss a little bit about my plans for that theme in my next video. Until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.